Okay, welcome to the very last class, the grand finale. Today we do the American Empire. July 1944. This is the Bretton Hotel in New Hampshire. 40 nations get together and they discuss what the post-war peace will look like. Everyone knows that Nazi Germany will eventually be defeated, as well as Japan. So the question now is, how does the world build peace and prosperity after such a devastating war? And the Americans propose the Bretton Woods system. The idea is this. The idea is to facilitate global trade. The American currency will become the reserve currency of the world, meaning that everyone can use it to trade. Now, the term we use for this is exorbitant privilege. This is like the power of God, because you're basically taking paper and turning it into gold, right? That's the power of God. So how can we ensure the Americans won't abuse this power? And the answer is the Americans agree to create a global financial network, as well as peg the currency to gold, which means that the USD is a contract. And at any point, you can choose to exchange US dollars for gold. And so what America does is it transports all the gold from London to Fort Knox. And that becomes the basis for the new global financial system that we still have today. And it is incredibly successful. This is the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. And it is the bank of banks. It is the central bank of central banks. And the idea here is you need to create a system for risk mitigation. So, for example, if maybe a country goes bankrupt, the other countries need to come in and rescue that country's economy. Okay? And so this bank is something you never heard of, but it's one of the most powerful institutions in the world because it facilitates the entire global financial economy. Bretton Woods also created something called the World Bank, which is based in Washington, D.C., and what it does is that it gives out loans to third world nations like China. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, coordinates global financial policy. Okay, so the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the IMF, among other organizations, now becomes the global financial system. And underpinning all of this is the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Okay, so where did the system come from? Well, it comes from 1688. Remember, this is the year that Willem of Orange of the Netherlands, he goes to England and launches something called the Glorious Revolution. And he takes the throne from James II. When he goes to England, he also brings with him Dutch wealth, right? Because the Netherlands is now the most prosperous nation in the world because of global trade. They have something called the Dutch West Indies Company that has monopolized the spice trade in East Asia. So it's the Dutch East Indies Company. And so it's extremely wealth. Now, as we discussed previously, the Dutch are Calvinists. So they believe that there's a religious obligation for them to get wealthy. Wealth will guarantee their entry into heaven. But for that to happen, they need to ensure their wealth is protected, right? And at this point in history, the Netherlands is being conquered or at war with France, with Spain, with a host of enemies. So it's not, the money isn't safe in the Netherlands, so it's being transferred over to England because England has a navy that is the most powerful in the world. It's also an island, so it's pretty hard to invade. 1694, this wealth becomes the basis of the Bank of England, which is considered the second oldest central bank in the world, but it's really the first central bank in the world. The reason why is this bank, it's a private bank, but it's guaranteed by Parliament, which means that the nation-state of England promises to always pay back the investors in this bank. So why does this happen? It happens because it will resolve a huge issue throughout human history. If you're a king, you need financing to go to war. You often need to pay foreign mercenaries. To get this money, you need to basically borrow from your wealthiest citizens. The problem with this is, as king, you may not want to pay back that money after the war, or you could get killed in the war. Okay, so there's always tremendous risk when you lend money to the king. The Bank of England solves this problem because you're not lending money to the king, you're lending money to England. And the people will always have to pay you back. All right, so maybe they won't pay you back today, but they'll have to pay you back sooner or later, okay, because it's guaranteed by Parliament. And this system is extremely successful. In fact, this system is what allows England to defeat Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars, okay? In 1815, Napoleon is finally defeated. So as we discussed previously, Napoleon, he is a military genius. And he conquers most of Europe. And he defeats England many, many times. But because of the Bank of England, the English have infinite financing. So the British are always financing wars against Napoleon until he is finally defeated. And this establishes the British Empire. Okay? So after the defeat of Napoleon in France, Britain becomes the global hegemon. And the Bank of England now becomes an imperial bank. And the power of this is, before, when you go and conquer a country or a nation, you're always afraid of rebellion. Right? You're always afraid of local elite getting together and overthrowing you. But the Bank of England solves this problem. Why? It solves this problem because now the local elite can take their corrupt earnings and put it in the Bank of England. All right? So now the elite have an incentive to work with the British to maintain their empire. And that's how Britain was able to build the world's first truly global empire and able to maintain such harmony and stability with the empire for such a long time. Okay? The secret was international finance as embodied by the Bank of England. Okay? So let's summarize the history of central banking. Okay? It's complicated, but we need to understand this history if we understand today's world. First important idea is the Dutch Calvinists, they have a religious obsession with storing wealth. Okay, remember we discussed this, right? The Protestant religion demands that you get rich. The Parliament of England guarantees this wealth, thus giving England infinite financing for wars. This is important because if Parliament is willing to guarantee financing, not only can it use all this wealth stored in the Bank of England, but it can also generate new wealth from investors overseas as well. Okay? Third idea. This financing, infinite financing, allows Britain to defeat Napoleon. Fourth, the Bank of England stores wealth of corrupt local elites, allowing for stability and harmony within the empire. Now, this is important. What will happen next is America will emulate this model and create something called the Federal Reserve in the year 1914. So the idea of the Federal Reserve is you have all these provincial banks around America. They get together and decide that we as private banks will convince the government, the Congress, to give us a power to print money. How do you print money? You issue loans, okay? When you issue loans, you're just basically putting money into the system, okay? So, in 1914, they developed the Federal Reserve System. And after World War II, America is now able to export this Federal Reserve System all around the world by creating independent central banks in each nation and having these central banks work together to create more wealth for their investors. So this is something really important you have to understand. Nation states compete against each other, but independent central states, all of these nation states, work together because that way it's easier for them to generate wealth for their investors, okay? To grow capital, private central banks coordinate rather than compete. They are parasites that feed off the nation state. Okay, so this is a really important idea that no one understands. The nation state is responsible for protecting this wealth, and the central banks can use the resources of the nation state to feed its capital growth. Okay, and this is the modern financial system that we have today. The central banks basically rule the world. All right. Okay. So this is Carroll Quigley, and he wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, which I highly recommend. He was a Georgetown professor. He was Bill Clinton's favorite professor at Georgetown. And in his book, he explains how this financial system works, okay? So let's read it very carefully. And he's talking about the 1920s. After World War I, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank, in the hands of men like Montague Norman of the Bank of England, Benjamin Strong of the New York Federal Reserve, Charles Riss of the Bank of France, and Helmut Schacht of the Reichsbank, sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. Okay, so in today's world, it's the central banks acting in concert that dictate financial, economic, and political policy all around the world. All right, so how can we understand central banks? Well, the main function of central banks is to control the money supply. Okay, so money is just a concept, it's an idea, it's something that we just made up. And the way the central bank controls money is by controlling its scarcity, which creates the illusion that it's valuable. Okay, also you're forced to use money to buy things as well as pay taxes, take out loans. All right. And they control the interest rate, which is the cost of borrowing money. So another way of saying this is, one mechanism the central bank has to control the economy is by lowering or increasing interest rates. If it lowers interest rates, it's just easier, cheaper to borrow money, right? So you can go buy a house.